Hello everyone. So this is a tutorial that someone requested on TikTok. I have the short version of it on TikTok, but as we all know, TikTok is very limited in how you can communicate certain things. So this is another tutorial about this. It's very simple, and as always, I just give you the outline and you can play around with it any way you want. So let's get started. Now here we have the picture we're going to be editing. The first step will be to separate the subject from the background, and to do this we just turn this into the background, double click, and this little lock will disappear. And now we're just gonna select the subject, let Photoshop do its magic. Then we see here we have a little bit of an issue, so we're just gonna roughly paint over it with the lasso tool, and we're gonna refine the edges here a little bit. Now, since we're going to cut away the top half of the head, we don't really need to work on the hair because we're going to delete this anyways. But here, in my case, I have a little bit of facial hair, so we're gonna work on that. Maybe the little earring here. So to do this, we're gonna go to select a mask, maybe change the skin so we actually see what we're doing, and we're just gonna paint over here just to make the edges here a little bit smoother. Then I'm going to decrease the size just to make this, it won't be perfect because there's not enough contrast between the ear and the background, but I don't want it to be that jaggery and sharp, so I'll just paint a little bit over this. And the same here. Making a rough selection with smooth edges, and then to copy our subject onto a new layer, we're gonna press Ctrl J, and here we have our subject. Now we're gonna control click on our subject to select this, and we want to erase this from our background. Now we need to add a little bit of the selection, otherwise we'll have dark edges around the deletion of it. So to do this, we go to select and we modify the selection. We're going to expand it, and sometimes it's hard to figure out by how much you want to expand it, so you have to experiment sometimes, unless you know exactly what PPI you're going to work on. And I already know that 15 is going to work more or less, so I'll just do this. And then we go to content aware fill, and now we see what it will do. Basically, content aware fill, the green area is your sample area that it's going to use to fill whatever you want to make disappear. We could also just add more to the sample material and see what it does. Let's see. It didn't really do that much different, but that's okay because the background is not very detailed. It's mainly just one color with a little bit of a gradient over it. So we can easily fix these little smudges here, and we're just gonna put the output onto the current layer and click OK. And now we see our subject disappeared, but we still have it on a separate layer. And now what I enjoy doing if I do not have a detailed background that is more or less just one color, I use my mixer brush tool, set the wetness to whatever. I wouldn't make it too high because then it smudges everything, so I'll just keep it around 30. You can experiment with it, see what works, and then I'll just kind of paint over these left and right. Basically, you use the smudge, sorry, not the smudge tool, but what is this called? Mixer brush tool, to blend in digital art. And here we're just using it to blend between different colors or gradients. And there we go. This is our background now. This is our subject. Now, just to make sure, I keep a copy of my subject just in case I ruin anything. I can always go back. So this is my subject copy. I just leave it here and turn it off. Now what we're gonna do is cut away the top half of the head and make it look hollow. A little extra tip, by the way, just as a photo or a design rule, not a rule but a tip. If you cover a subject's eyes, it automatically gives a feeling of like censorship almost. So if you do something like this, it automatically feels like there's a distance between us and the subject because we cannot have eye contact with them. If you do it the other way around, it's gonna be more mysterious because all we can see is the eyes, which is still a quite intimate connection if you want to call it this, but everything else is kind of veiled. So how you want to do this is completely up to you, because this effect is going to be quite obvious photo manipulation. It doesn't have to be too realistic. Like, it's okay if the cut is a little bit rough, and this is why I'm going to use the lasso tool and really just kind of freehand it, and I'm just going to do this. And then if you want to add to the selection, which I'm going to have to do, hold down Shift, and then you can just add this. What we're going to do, we're just going to delete this. Control D to deselect or to nullify the selection. Now what we're going to do is pretend that we can see the back of our subject's head. And we're going to do this by making a new layer. We call this back of head. Alright. And same as before, this doesn't have to be perfectly generated back of the head. It's completely okay if it's a little bit jaggery, and I just try to keep it neutral and just kind of... Now I selected a little bit too much here. I'll just do this. I'm working with a mouse, by the way, just to show you guys, you do not need, for this kind of design, you do not need to have a pen or a tablet or anything. In general, for graphic design, it's better because you just have so much more control over what you're doing, but it's also equipment that you need to invest into, and we do not always have the money to do that. So I just want to show you guys a way to make it regardless of what equipment you have. Something like this. And this is going to be the fill of the back of the head. Now, what you can do is, just use a color and paint it in, and then work on a shading like this and so on. Completely plausible. If you're good with color and good with painting, go ahead, do this. What I decided to do is to actually sample the color of my actual skin. So here I have the stamp tool, and I'm going to sample parts of my skin and paint this in, well, on the actual back layer. Now, what we have to keep in mind to make this effect work a little bit better than if you just throw it in there is we have to pay attention to where the light is coming from. So in this picture, the light is coming from the left, front left I would say, because we have a little bit of light on this cheek here, but there's clearly shadow on this side of the head and here on the nose. So we will have some light here, but this part here is going to be in shadow. So if we have this here, this might be a little bit too big. That's what she said. We'll have some shadow, like the light will barely hit this part here. But here we will clearly have shadow because the light is hitting from the side to this. With this in mind, I will try to use the shadowy parts of my skin. Now, a little tip. With the stamp tool, if you hold down Alt, you choose the area you want to sample. Normally a line here is checked, and what this does is if I sample this part and I start painting and now move my mouse over here, the sample area moved according to my mouse. If you check this off, as soon as you let go of the mouse, it will reset. So I can basically put a new starting point. And I use the shadowy part here, and I'm just going to fill this in like this. Basically we have the back of the hat now. Now we're gonna work on two things: the transitions, the overall transitions, because this looks quite patchy, it doesn't look nice at all. And the other thing that we're gonna work on is blurriness, because as we can see, this is quite a shallow depth of field picture. My nose is completely sharp, but the side of my face is already getting blurry. Everything that is further behind than the nose will be blurry as well. And what I enjoy doing actually to kind of work on that is not using the Gaussian blur in this specific example, because it will mess up our edge as well. We're gonna make the edge a little bit blurry afterwards, but in terms of color and clearance of the skin, I do not want to do this. So I either use the surface blur, which works differently than the Gaussian blur. As you can see, the edges are still quite sharp. It just kind of blurs the surfaces. And there we go. Now, if these transitions are still a little bit too rough, we can go to the mixer brush again and just make these transitions a little bit smoother. Now, this is another thing that we have to keep in mind. Our shadows here are quite soft. What we mean by a soft shadow is, let's say this is a highlight area. No, actually this is the dark area, let's say. This would be a harsh shadow. So you have a highlight and then a very sharp transition into this. A soft shadow, it is a smudgy, blurry transition between highlight and shadowy part. Now, something else we want to do is, at the moment it looks like that the shell of our head, if we want to call it that, is thin as paper, because we do not see an edge here. And for this, we're going to control click on the back of the head, and we're going to subtract from this selection. For this, we go to select, modify, contract, subtract the amount of thickness that you want to make the edge. And I'm going to do this. Now we're gonna make a new layer on top of the back of the head. We call this edge. And what we have to do now, we can only paint inside of the selection. What we want to do is paint outside of the selection. So we go Control Shift I, and then we are going to paint in the edge. And again, I'm just going to and then once we have this, we are going to press Alt and only apply it to the back of the head. Also, if you want to be very, very detailed with this, you can add another edge here that kind of follows this. So it feels like it adds a little bit more dimension into the whole thing. Now here as well, to make it look a little bit more realistic, we'd have to work on a little bit of shading. But we're going to do this by adding a folder here. So basically this folder is the whole back of the head with the edge together. And I'm going to add a curves layer, and I only apply it to the folder. So basically what we're going to do now is we dodge and burn. And now things that I want to make a little bit darker, I can just paint in. Okay, now what we're gonna do, we turn off the background for a second, and now we press Control, Shift, Alt, and E. So what this does is it makes a merged copy of everything that is visible and pastes it on the very top. Now you can theoretically put the rest that was part of your subject into a folder and just hide it. And now we have a layer that is actually this little man here. Now we put him into the center, and now we're going to fill this part here in. Sample this, go to the brush at the stamp settings on the right hand and choose here that you want to flip horizontally. So it paints this part here, but mirrors it. We shouldn't go all layer, we should only go current layer. You could then just select this and deform it a little bit just to give the illusion that this is part of the shoulder. And now we have our subject here. I'm going to use the blur tool here. And I'm just going to make some of the edges here a bit blurry. You can decide on the strength, maybe do it a little bit lower if you're uncertain what amount is good and which amount would be too much. And there we go. This is basically our main composition, and everything else is quite easy to apply. What we're going to do is we're going to apply a gradient from our layer options here. And with gray, a lot of things work. So you could go with orange, blue, purple, pretty much everything works. For this tutorial, we're gonna go with some bluish color or something. We can even make it a bit saturated because the gray is desaturated, so we add a little bit of color into it. And now, just as before, Alt click to apply it only on our subject. And now you can do whatever you want. Actually, you can work with the blending options here, add some sort of effect to it, or you can simply lower the fill or the opacity to make the effect less extreme, or you can go double click into this and change the scale of this one. Then what I could do as well is go to blending options and say it shouldn't affect certain things underneath, just to see if it will have a cool effect. This actually looks a little bit better. If we take it a bit away from the highlights and only everything that is in the mid-tones or in the shadowy tones is affected by this cyan color. And now we're going to frame this somehow. Do the circle, then drag these two on top of it. And here we would have our design. You can also work on the opacity of this one, just to blend a little bit more with the background. And this is basically the design, finished. Use different shapes, use different subjects, colors. You can write something into the middle of it. You can even use a triangle here, that would look cool as well. So yeah, very simple. Very simple usage of the Photoshop functions. And you can have so much fun with the results. Have fun with it, experiment with it. If you want to share your work, just tag me on the Instagram account and I will see whatever you post there. I'll be happy to get inspired by your work and rip off your work, obviously. But yeah, hope it could help somehow, and see you for the next video.